So let's start off by importing our low poly. So I always use just the Unreal Engine 4 because that's usually what I make my things for. So I always set the resolution to 4K, even if I'm not going to use this object in scene at 4K for the game or whatever project I'm working on. I still like to texture in 4K. It's just a little quirk of mine. I never even export out at a lower resolution than 4K, and then I'll just lower it in Unreal manually, or I'll change it up in Photoshop. So then you just select your file and just hit OK. And then as you can see, here's the UVs that ZBrush created for me. Typically, I usually texture like 3 rocks on one UV sheet and do it at 4K. That's usually what I do. I like to delete the base layer, and I go over to the texture set. Also, if you're like texturing and you do want to see it at a lower resolution, you can always just select the size of your document here. And I like to, and you'll see why I do this, add a ambient occlusion to my channels. Even though there's already in here, I like to add it to my channels of export. Then I go over to Bake Mesh Maps, set it to 4K, bring in the high poly, and then I turn off ID. I don't use ID. I like to bring up just the frontal distance. That's basically how far away from the low poly it's picking up the geometry of the high poly, and this is how inward from the low poly on this one. I like to just bring this up by 1 notch. And then if I'm baking like props and such, I use match by mesh name. Maybe I might go into that later. I don't turn on anti-aliasing just yet. Don't worry about any of that. The only thing I really do is I like to bring up the secondary rays. It's my kind of thing. And then I hit bake. So let's let this bake and then I'll jump right back into it. Alright, welcome back. So this is a pretty decent bake. So now I know I can turn up anti-aliasing and such. You know, I don't really need my texture too much on the left here and this down here. So I'm just going to bring this down. Now that the baking is done, again, save. Always make sure you save. Now let's go back to layers. And the first thing I like to do is I don't really feel like I get a real... Oh, you can also change your environment by shift, right-clicking and dragging, rotating your environment. I don't feel like the environment map it comes with gives me a realistic depiction of what it's going to look like with just solid white colors for rendering and such. Depending on what I'm doing, some projects I might have some HDRs specifically made from the environment already. But if you just go to your environments tab, I like to work with like either Studio 3. See how it already changes the color? Your environment, depending on what you're doing, might give you a different idea of like your textures. Like if you were using this environment, the light is giving it such a green tint. You bring it into Unreal and you're like, well, why is it less green? So I like to use Studio 3 or Studio 5. Maybe Studio Automotive, I think this is called. But I think Studio 3 gives me good shadows and good highlights and such. Anyway, so let's go into this. If you wanted just a simple rock, you can always just use the materials in here that's already came in. I've imported a lot of different materials, especially from Substance Source, and made my own. But, you know, bare concrete is one of the ones that comes in there. You can just throw it in there and then be done, and you're happy. But, oh, no. Ooh. Well. So here's a good example of, like, why I messed up by using the UVs from ZBrush. Let's just ignore that for now. We all make mistakes. Easy fix. That's the greatest thing about Substance Painter. You know what? It actually works in our favor because now I can go back and show you how to fix that, but we can still continue texturing. You got your scene, and you can be like, this is done, it's a rock, whatever, but I'm a little bit more like wanting to make sure things look really great. Cool thing is, I know I have a video on getting rid of scenes, but depending on if you do this right or not, you can always use a triplanar material and get a much better projection, and typically it gets rid of your seams. This is just bad UVs, but again, I'll show you how to fix that. Typically, my workflow is still the same as it's always been. I go in and, you know, throw a base concrete or something on there. Even though I already got my normals from my bake and such, if you look at it, these normals aren't that good. So throwing something in there is pretty good. I like to use my base, though, a little bit differently. I don't like to get the roughness or the metal from it. I like to either just get height and normals and turn off base color, but this is a little too intense, you know? So you could, my workflow, and this is about learning, is I used to just throw in a levels and then, oh, that's not levels. Throw in a levels right here and then switch, and, you know, it was a little bit more complicated until, you know, I thought about it. You can just go to your base. Let's say the normals are a little too intense. Just go to normals. And you can just, like in Photoshop, bring this down. You know, so let's, like, set that to 50. I get a lot of notifications. Sorry about that. And then the height is still a little too intense, you know. So let's set this to 50 as well. A lot better. I feel like it adds to your normals and such. But, you know, you can always play around with it. I personally still think that 50 is a little too high. So I'm going to go with, like, maybe 25. And I feel like that gives it a bit more realistic. But I want to make the bumps, you know, a little bit bigger. And I like using triplanar now. So, you know, I'm going to just set that to 25. There we go. Bigger bumps, because this is a bigger rock. Now I'm going to just change this to normal base. All right, go back to base color. Next step, let's take care of color, roughness, and metallic. I'm going to add a fill color on top, and I'm going to just call this base color. And I'm going to go over and turn off height and normal, because I'm not going to use that right now. The roughness, I'm going to just say the base roughness for the rock is somewhere like, oh, that's metallic. Turned off roughness. So yeah, go, you know, give it like the base of it a pretty rough, probably like 0.85. So, you know, there's no roughness. If you hit C, you can check it out. So here's our roughness and such. The whiter it is, the less shiny. The blacker it is, the more shiny, and vice versa for metallic. We're just going to use a black metallic. So I'm just going to address, in my very first video, 3 years ago, I used to mess with the metallic for rocks and concrete and such. Don't do that. You don't need to. I learned. I thought it made things look better. It doesn't. So just go back to M, so we can see the material. There you go. It's already looking pretty rocky, but, you know, no color. So let's give it, let's just pick a color from over here. It's a good rock color. Something like that, a little bit more gray, like an off orangish. So there we go. There we got our base. I like to do is just go over and duplicate. And I like to work dark to light. That's just the way I really work. You can experiment. Everyone's a little bit different. So I'm just going to call this light. So I'm going to put some highlights in here and such. Lighter color. So I'm going to go over back to my base and just pick a lighter color. And then I'm going to try my best to get the highlights on this. And the higher points to me will have a little bit more roughness, or less roughness. So I'm going to put like 0.5, make it a little bit shinier. In my first video, I heavily relied on smart masks. Well, I'm going to go a little bit more advanced in this. I'm going to go over, and I always do this. I don't even really use smart masks anymore unless I'm just trying to do something quickly. So I'm going to hit add a black mask. With black mask, it completely masks it out. Only thing that shows up if I paint it on here is whatever I paint. And if I hit C and go over a couple times, I can find my mask. Only thing that shows up on this layer is what's white. But I never paint on my base black mask. I always will add something like paint in there. So, but for now, what we're going to do is add a fill. I like doing this because it's my way of achieving whatever I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the highlights on here, and you could use a generator, but I feel like I can just go to my project and drag in something like my curvature right over here. And, you know, for now, I'm just going to move the saturation all the way up so it'll be easier to see. So I'm using the curvature map as my mask. Now, this isn't what I'm really trying to achieve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a levels on top. Levels are pretty self-explanatory. What it looks like is it's using the baking, which is what I was trying to use anyway. So let's turn that off for now. Let's pretend like I didn't have that base right now. So that's basically what I'm trying to do here. But it's a little too much, a little too intense. So now with the levels, I'm going to bring up the black just a little bit. So bring down the gray. So, no, bring it up just white. It's pretty much just experimenting with that. And then I can also change the how much the white really shows, so it's not as intense. And then I can go back over here and bring down the saturation, bring that down. There we go. The only negative is it's not really picking up on the normals, but we can fix that using anchor points. Now if we go to our normals right over here and click this and add an anchor point, it would say normal base. Now we go over here, go to our levels and such. Now we need to use a generator. So if we add a generator, go over, we can do something like, let's just do curvature right over here. So it's still using the curvature map and such, but now we can go to use micro details. Hit accept. I'm gonna just turn this off down here. So we hit true, micro details, go to right here, micro height, anchor points, click it, micro normal, anchor points, hit there, and it does nothing. So I figured it out. It's all about experimenting. That's one of the things about texturing for me is it's kind of like going with the flow. I need to change the reference channel to, you know, refer to normal for normal and height for height on the anchor point. If you look at it, this is what we're getting. Now I'm going to just bring down the contrast, something very low. I'm bring down the curvature intensity, bring down the height, so I can make this subtle as well. But now we want to add it on top of this. What I'm going to do is just duplicate this, and then delete these two, go over here, delete this one. Now it's on top of each other, but that's not really what I was trying to achieve just yet because they look very different. So what I'm going to do is go to my curvature on top. I'm going to add a filter. Go over here and just blur. A little too much on the blur, so maybe like 0.1. There we go. So let's just call this small details. You know, whatever, if I spelled that right or not, I don't know. Now the small details, I want them to not show up as much as the other curvature. I'm just going to, under base color, go over here. I'm going to just set this to 50. Pretty subtle. Let's change that color. So let's bring it more to this right over here. Hit C, go to base color. Let's select this again, then bring it up. Select this color again, and then bring it up lighter. I do not want a major contrast between the two, just a subtle contrast. There we go. And then right over here, just select that color that I created. There we go. And now if I hit C, you can see there's a difference in roughness as well. So hit M, you can tell that there's a huge difference. Adds much more to it. But now, I think the base color needs a different type of roughness, in my opinion. Because if I just go to back to my roughness, it's pretty flat on the bottom. Yeah, this breaks it up, but I still want to break up this area even more. So in between the light in here, I'm going to create another fill layer, and I'm going to call this rough diff, for difference. And then I'm going to turn everything off except my roughness. And here, I'm going to, oh man, what roughness did I pick here? 0.85. So over here, I'm going to put like 0.75. So you can see it's already just changing the roughness here. Now I'm going to add another black mask. You can always use, the smart masks, but I like creating everything I do from scratch. Hit add fill again. And now in here, I like using like procedurals or grunges. I'm going to use a grunge, and I'm going to pick something like this dirt dried. Insert it, and now you already see the huge difference, adding that. Depending on your object, you might not care, but I do, so I'm going to just switch this to triplanar, and then you can mess with the settings if you want. And now with this grunge, I can change the contrast. I can do all kinds of different things. Bring up the contrast a bit. Going back to material, to me, you might not see it in the video, it adds so much more to my rock. Then you could go in here and you can add a color too. You know, this could be a dark color. So let's select our base color right over here and let's darken it up a bit. There we go. Already looks a lot better. Already pushing that look of a realistic rock, and then we could be done here. I really want to push this even more. And there's a reason why I added that ambient occlusion map in there. You know, you baked in so much, but it doesn't look real because there's no shadow information. Right here, we're only getting ambient occlusion of what we baked. We didn't get ambient occlusion of any of this normal information, height. And for the longest time, I would either use bake environment. I use that if I'm just using base color completely. And I'll show you what that looks like. You throw it on top, it's going to slow everything down. Hit C, go to base color, and turn it off and on. It's using the environment map, which is just white here, to put shadows into your diffuse. Now, if you're just using straight diffuse, this thing works great. You can use environments. This also helps, like I said, about if you have an HDR environment, it changes the color. So now you got that more green look, and then you can change all kinds of things, and it's all in your diffuse. But this isn't really what I was looking for. So let me just get rid of that. How do we push what I'm looking for? Right here, HBAO, matte FX. So if you just drag this on the top, I thought it would work right out the gate. You know, look at it; it's already working. The problem is it doesn't work unless you add that ambient occlusion channels. This is why I really use height, you know, on top of all my normals. I just bring it down and such. So if I hit C a couple of times, I can see the ambient occlusion here. It's going to bake out with my ambient occlusion. And then you can always go to Photoshop and put it on top into your diffuse, whatever you're trying to do. It's a little too intense, so I'm going to bring down the rate, the depth to 0.1 and bring that down. So hit A. And again, if you're doing a lot of normal baking, like screws, vents, all kinds of different things, but you're not really getting that realism, I highly recommend this technique. Because if you just look at the difference, it adds so much. This rock is going to go in a scene, especially since it was photogrammetry, a little bit of dirt on the bottom here. So let's go to the top and let's add another fill layer. Turn off everything else, keep the height. And let's put this back on the top right over here. There. Let's turn it off just for now so it doesn't slow anything down. Go back to my fill. I'm going to call this G dirt for the ground, whatever. I'm going to select a red just so it's a little bit easier to see. I like just, this hurts your eyes, I'm sorry. It makes things easier for me. Turn everything else off except rough, height, color. Turn off the AO. Bring up the height a little. The roughness, it's dirt, somewhere like 0.6. Just give them variation. I would usually go higher, but whatever. So you could just go to your smart mask right over here, and there's one that's called ground dirt. Drag it in, and change the color and call it at the end of the day. Or it looks good, but I'm gonna show you my method. I like doing things my way. So if I add my black mask, go over, I can now add a generator. Go over here, and this really helps. You can either use a light or a position. I like position. It really helps get a good gradient. And then I'm just going to invert it. If I hit C a few times, go to my mask, you can see it. I'm going to bring it down, or bring the contrast up a bit, and then bring that down. So I really want some good dirt right there. And go back here to my position. I'm going to add another fill on top, and I'm going to add another grunge. Let's add something dirty. The dirt, that works. Add it on top, but it's not doing anything, not the way we want, it's covering everything. So I'm going to go back to triplanar. I'm going to switch this. I like using subtract because I'm pretty simple-minded, but you can use any of these things. Just play around with it. Get all kinds of different looks and such. But I'm going to go with subtract, and I'm going to bring it down a bit. And I'm just going to keep that. Then, I can mess with the balance. Bring up the balance and such, and then go back to my dirt, give it a dirt color. I just want something really subtle like this. I don't really want it too dirty. I just want it to look like it was recently placed there. Go back to my height and play around with that. So, get a good height in there. Let's just go back over, turn on my AO, and then now it's adding AO to the dirt as well. So, through, there we go. So if I turn that off, so, you can really achieve that realism with that. And then what I like to do, totally optional, is I like to, right underneath, add another fill layer. This is the last thing I like to do. Now I'm going to just call this Shadow Boost. And I'm going to pick just a straight black. I'm going to go through everything except rough, because again, we don't need metallic. Completely no roughness whatsoever. Go back, add a black mask, add a fill, back to project, add my ambient occlusion, and then it's not really doing what I want it to do, so I'm going to just, where is it? Add levels and invert, and it adds more shadow information on top, and then I'm going to switch this to multiply, and now with the levels here, I can adjust how much I want to push the shadows. I could really, if this is in a dark scene, bring those shadows up. I kind of like that, but not that much. Something like that. And if I go to my base color, again, this is, if you're really trying to push your low poly stuff, here's your good base color. Really adds to the realism in the base color. But I did promise at the end of the tutorial, I'll show you how I fixed these horrible seams. Here's the great thing about Substance Painter. Let's find that horrible seam. Now if I go to Edit, Project Configuration, and just re-bring in my low poly right here, and then hit OK. Let Substance do its thing. Now we have the seam as such. Now all we gotta do is go back and rebake. So let me rebake, and there we go. Now, this creates a new problem. Typically, if you weren't using the AO filter that I was showing you, you wouldn't have this problem. You just saw it went away as soon as I turn it off. It picks up the seam. You can bring up the blur intensity a bit and make it not as noticeable. This is why you got to be very mindful of your seams for your projects and such, especially depending on whatever prop you're making and such. And again, maybe the environment baking will work for you. Who knows? Play around with it. This is just the way I like to do things. I know this has kind of been jumping around between being a pretty beginner to intermediate tutorial and such. Give me your opinion in the description down below. But I think what I'm going to do is plan out a asset from start to finish for my next series kind of thing, where I'm going to create something from the low poly, high poly, all the way to finished in implementation in Unreal. Thank you. Please subscribe. Please let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to improve my way of showing what I do. You check out my social medias, ways to get a hold of me. I plan to start streaming again from playing games to what I'm doing right here, making assets. Thank you. I know it's been a long time since I've uploaded anything. I really want to get into this a little bit more.